The whip cracked through the air like a rattlesnake's warning, slicing the silence that had settled over the sun-baked land. The dust was thick, choking, and the sky glared down with a molten heat that seemed to punish everything it touched. The ranch, if you could call it that, sat like a wounded animal on the horizon. One crooked barn, a sagging house, and fences half collapsed. It was the kind of place folks passed without looking twice, the kind that swallowed noise and spat out silence. Thomas Granger stood with his back rigid, lips sealed tight, jaw clenched as blood trickled down from his shoulder blade beneath his shirt. Behind him, Abigail stifled a cry, her fists balled up at her sides. She was 13 and wild-eyed, her tongue sharp, her spirit sharper. The younger ones, Levi and Ruthie, watched from the corner of the porch, too afraid to speak, too young to understand why kindness was never allowed here. Jedediah Granger lowered the whip with a grunt, sweat glistening on his brow. He wasn't a man shaped by mercy. His face was a canyon of old scars and rage, a broken war veteran turned cattle rancher, though the cattle were gone and only the rage remained. He ran his house the way he'd once run a regiment, harsh, without room for question or pause. "You don't talk back to me," he barked, voice like gravel. "This ain't no damn democracy." Thomas didn't reply. Not now. Not ever when it counted. Speaking had a price, and right now it was Abigail who'd paid it, mouthing off when Jedediah denied them supper. He could take the whip. He'd taken worse. But his sister's defiance? That was harder to protect. Jedediah stalked off toward the barn, muttering curses under his breath, the bottle of rotgut whiskey already calling. His boots thudded against the dry ground, trailing dust like the devil's own shadow. The silence he left behind was louder than any scream. The moment he disappeared, Abigail rushed to Thomas. "Let me see it," she whispered. She didn't wait for permission, just pulled up his shirt and hissed through her teeth. "3 good ones. Bastard." "I've had worse," he said, trying to grin but failing. She wet a handkerchief with the last of the water in her canteen and dabbed gently at the welts. "That was my fault." "No," Thomas said. "It was his." Ruthie approached quietly, dragging a ragged doll behind her, the button eyes barely hanging on. "Are you gonna die?" "Not today, Ladybug," Thomas replied, reaching out to tap her on the nose. Levi didn't say anything. He just handed Thomas a piece of dry cornbread, more crumbs than bread, but it was all they had. The boy's eyes were too old for 10, filled with a silence that knew better than to trust daylight or promises. Inside the house, the floorboards creaked with Jedediah's pacing. The kids retreated behind the barn, out of earshot, into the shadowed corner where they kept a small stash, blankets, food scraps, a bent spoon Abigail had stolen from town once because it made Ruthie laugh. "Maybe we should run," Abigail said. She said it a lot. But this time she said it like she meant it. "Where would we go?" Levi asked, picking at a splinter on his knee. "Anywhere's better," she shot back. "A grave's better." Thomas looked at the sky. The sun was dipping now, bleeding into the desert, throwing gold and crimson across the dying world. He didn't want to say what he was thinking, that they couldn't leave because they'd die out there, starve, get taken, disappear like smoke. But staying was killing them one piece at a time. "I'm working on it," he said. And he was. He always was. They spent the night in the hayloft even though the house had rooms. Safer there. Quieter. Jedediah never climbed the ladder when he drank, and he drank every night. Thomas wrapped a threadbare blanket around Ruthie, then lay back against the hay. Abigail lay beside him, humming some half-remembered lullaby their mother used to sing before the fever took her. "She'd hate him now," Abigail whispered. "She always hated him," Thomas answered. They didn't speak after that. The wind whispered through the slats of the barn, carrying the scent of dry earth and loneliness. Coyotes cried in the distance. Somewhere an owl called out. Night in the desert came quick, and it didn't stay quiet for long. Jedediah's snoring started around midnight, loud, guttural, a monster in slumber. Thomas counted the beats between each exhale. He always did. It helped him fall asleep. Morning came hard and dry. The sun rose like a knife, and with it the orders began. Feed the horses, what was left of them. Fix the fence. Chop wood. Clean the gutters. Jedediah pointed, barked, threatened. Always with a switch in his belt and a flask in his coat. No one said much. Abigail mouthed off once and got her lips split. That was 2 months ago. She still smiled crooked from it. By midday Ruthie had developed a cough. She sat under the porch with her doll, hacking quietly, covering her mouth with a scrap of cloth. "She needs medicine," Abigail said. Jedediah scoffed. "She needs to toughen up." Thomas stepped forward. She needs laudanum or willow bark tea at least. She's 6, Pa. Jedediah's hand moved fast, faster than Thomas had expected. A backhand across the face, open-palmed and vicious. Thomas staggered but stayed upright. You ain't the man here, Jedediah growled. No one spoke for the rest of the day. That night, after the chores were done and Jedediah had locked himself in with his bottle, Thomas climbed up the hill behind the house. He sat under the twisted juniper tree, the only one for miles, and stared at the stars. He missed his mother most on nights like this. She used to sit with him right here, pointing out constellations, weaving stories from the stars. Said the sky didn't care what happened on Earth. It just kept shining. Abigail joined him a few minutes later, silent at first. Then she said, "There's a way out. We just haven't found it yet." Thomas nodded. "We will." "How can you be so sure?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because if we don't, one of us is going to kill him. And if that happens, we don't get to be who we were meant to be." She swallowed hard. "I think I'd be okay with that." He smiled faintly. "Me too." But Ruthie wouldn't. Down below, the lantern in the window flickered. Jedediah's shadow moved past it, huge and lumbering, a reminder of the cage they lived in. They didn't know it yet, but someone else was watching from farther up the ridge. A figure on horseback, cloak drawn tight, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The rider had paused when the whip cracked earlier, waited when the silence returned. Now they sat still as stone, eyes locked on the tiny broken homestead, lips tight with something between rage and sorrow. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight belonged to Thomas and the promise he made to the stars. One more day. One more try. One more piece of the plan falling into place. Back in the barn, Ruthie murmured in her sleep, clutching her doll tight. Levi whispered nonsense stories to her, the only thing he knew to chase the dreams away. Abigail eventually came down from the hill and curled up beside them. Thomas stayed up just a little longer, watching the horizon, where the desert met the sky. Something had to change. Something would. He didn't know when or how, but he'd decided it wouldn't end here with broken fences and a whip in the dirt. And far off, the figure on the ridge turned their horse toward the valley road, where a different kind of justice waited in the dust. The wind rolled in dry from the east, pushing dust devils across the prairie. By mid-morning, the sun bore down like a punishment, cracking the earth and drawing sweat from even the most stubborn skin. Thomas was fixing a fence post that wouldn't stay put, Levi handing him tools in silence, when they saw the rider approaching. A speck at first, growing larger, steadier, until the glint of sunlight on metal told them this wasn't some lost cowboy or mail carrier. Thomas straightened, squinting into the glare. "We don't get visitors," he murmured. Levi didn't answer, but his grip on the hammer tightened. The rider came alone, tall in the saddle, horse moving at a smooth, unhurried pace. Whoever it was rode like they belonged in the saddle, back straight, reins held loose as if nothing on this land could surprise them. Dust covered the coat they wore, and their wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow that hid their face. But as they neared the ranch, the shape clarified. A woman. That much was unmistakable. Jedediah stumbled out of the house with a rifle in his hand and the usual anger in his eyes. "Ain't sellin'. Ain't buyin'. Keep movin'," he hollered before she even reached the porch. The rider slowed to a stop. "Not here to trade," she said calmly. Her voice was low, a little raspy, touched by travel and smoke. She tipped her hat back, revealing a sun-browned face with eyes too sharp to belong in a place like this. "Just need some water." Thomas caught the smallest flicker of uncertainty cross Jedediah's face. The woman didn't flinch, didn't smile, just waited. Her presence was like a storm cloud, quiet, heavy, charged. "You can fill your canteen from the trough," Jedediah grunted, motioning with the rifle barrel. She nodded once and dismounted with practiced ease. Her boots hit the ground with a satisfying thud. She walked past Jedediah like he wasn't holding a weapon, like she'd seen 1,000 just like him and forgotten every one. Thomas stayed near the fence, watching. Abigail had emerged from the barn, her hands smudged with grease, trying to fix the broken grain grinder again. Ruthie was trailing her with the limp of a girl who hadn't eaten enough in weeks. The stranger caught sight of Ruthie and paused mid-step. Her eyes softened, only slightly, but it was enough to catch Thomas's attention. She knelt beside the child, ignoring Jedediah's warning growl. "You hurt?" the woman asked. Ruthie glanced toward the house, uncertain. "Fell off the porch last week," she mumbled. "It's not bad." The woman looked at the sling around her shoulder, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small strip of cloth-wrapped candy and held it out. "You like peppermint?" Ruthie blinked. She hadn't tasted anything sweet in months. She nodded slowly. She don't need your handouts, Jedediah snapped, stepping forward. The woman rose to full height, turned just enough to glance at him over her shoulder. Didn't offer you one. That silenced him for a breath. Just one. Thomas stepped forward before it could go worse. She didn't mean anything. She was just being kind. Jedediah turned his glare on his son. Don't talk like you got rights. The woman's eyes lingered on Thomas then, as if reading something behind his defiance. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated. Thomas. I'm Marigold, she said simply. Abigail approached now, arms folded, chin high. You traveling alone? Marigold nodded. Safer that way. Abigail looked her over with the sharp gaze of someone who'd had to grow up fast. You military? Used to be. Union scout. Abigail nodded like she'd expected as much. Marigold's posture, the way she never looked away, the way her hands stayed near the pistol at her hip, all of it told a story. Jedediah was getting restless. You got your water. Go on. I will. Marigold's tone didn't shift, didn't rise. But her eyes lingered one more moment on the children. On Thomas's bruised jaw. On the bandage around Ruthie's shoulder. On Abigail's scarred lip. She didn't speak of them directly. Not yet. Just gave Thomas a long, deliberate look before turning back to her horse. As she mounted, she paused and reached into her saddlebag. She tossed something onto the fence post beside Thomas. It was a piece of folded paper. She rode off without another word. Thomas waited until she was out of sight before he picked up the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, blocky, no nonsense. If you want out, meet me at the old cattle bridge. 2 nights from now. Midnight. Bring only what you love. He read it twice. Then again. Abigail hovered behind him. What's it say? He showed her. She smiled, sharp and wild. She's not scared of him. No, Thomas said, folding the note and tucking it into his boot. She's not. Ruthie sat on the porch with the peppermint still in her hand, unwrapped but untouched. Levi sat beside her, watching the sky where Marigold had disappeared. No one spoke for a while. Even Jedediah, who'd gone back into the house, didn't make a sound. That night, Thomas lay awake in the barn, listening to the wind. The note burned against his skin like a brand. Someone had seen them. Really seen them. And someone wasn't afraid. Changed everything. Or it would if they had the courage to follow. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Jedediah's mood darkened like storm clouds that never broke, and every footstep he took felt like a threat. The kids moved around him like ghosts, saying little, doing only what was demanded. The bruises were fading, but the fear never did. Abigail kept sneaking glances at Thomas, waiting for him to say the word. The note was still hidden in his boot, and he hadn't told anyone what he planned to do, not even her. But he was planning. Each night, he went up the hill under the juniper tree and watched the stars the way his mother used to. He thought about Marigold's calm gaze, the way she didn't flinch when Jedediah yelled, the quiet way she saw through all of it. She hadn't offered them false promises. She'd offered a door. But stepping through it meant risking everything. On the second night, the air felt electric. As if the desert knew what was coming. Abigail came to him after dark with a small satchel she'd patched from flour sacks. Inside were 4 apples, a tin of beans, a knife, and a Bible she'd stolen back from Jedediah's room. We don't even believe in this anymore, she said as she handed it over. But Mama did. And if she believed in anything, it was getting us away from him. Thomas looked at her for a long time. You sure? I'm not staying another year in this house. Another week. He's breaking us. One breath at a time. Thomas tightened the string on the bag and nodded. We go tonight. Levi had already packed, quiet and focused, as if he'd been preparing long before Thomas ever mentioned it. Ruthie was the hardest. She didn't want to leave her doll and she didn't want to walk far. Her cough was worse and Thomas knew she wouldn't make it on foot for long. So he made a choice. When Jedediah passed out that night, just like every other night, Thomas stole the keys from his coat pocket and crept out to the stable. The old mule was too slow, the bay too loud. But there was still the roan gelding Jedediah had kept for emergencies. Fast, quiet, strong. Thomas saddled him in silence while Abigail soothed Ruthie, whispering promises into her sister's tangled hair. Levi kept watch, knife tucked in his belt, eyes sharp. They left just after midnight. The stars blinked above them, cool and indifferent. No one spoke. Not until the ranch was a smudge in the dark behind them. Do you think she'll be there? Abigail whispered. She said she would, Thomas replied. She doesn't seem like someone who lies. The bridge wasn't far, just 5 miles through a narrow gulch along the creek bed. It was hidden well, half-collapsed, forgotten since the cattle trade dried up. They kept to the shadows, avoiding the main trail, listening for any sound of pursuit. The desert was alive in a different way at night. Crickets hummed low, and the occasional howl of a coyote made Ruthie cling tighter to Thomas's neck as she rode the roan behind him. The children moved like fugitives, hearts pounding, every sound magnified in the stillness. By the time they reached the bridge, dawn was just starting to paint the eastern sky. Abigail spotted the campfire first, small, smokeless, tucked beneath a ridge. Marigold was there, waiting. She looked like she hadn't moved since she left them. She stood as they approached, tall and still, her coat pulled tight against the chill. Her horse was already saddled. There were 4 bedrolls beside her and a pack filled with supplies. "You made it," she said. Thomas nodded. "We didn't tell him. I figured." Marigold handed him a canteen. "Drink. Then we move fast. You've got maybe a 6-hour head start before he wakes up and starts looking." "He'll come hard," Abigail said. "With a gun." "I'll be ready." Marigold didn't waste time with comfort. She handed them each a roll of jerky and laid out the plan. "There's an old relay station 20 miles east. Used to be for mail riders. It's half burned but still got walls and a roof. We hole up there until night, then cross into Red Bluff. There's a preacher there who hates men like your father. He'll keep you safe." Thomas asked the question they were all thinking. "Why are you doing this?" Marigold didn't smile. "Because someone did it for me once. Because nobody else will. And because if we don't help each other, what's the damn point of surviving?" That was enough. They rode hard all morning. Ruthie shared a saddle with Abigail, and Levi rode behind Marigold. The sun came up sharp and merciless and the trail turned rough. But they didn't stop. By noon the relay station appeared, half a shell built into a rock face, scorched on one side but sturdy enough. They tied the horses under brush and settled inside. Thomas and Levi took shifts keeping watch while Marigold cleaned Ruthie's wounds and applied a salve that smelled like pine and smoke. "She'll be okay," Marigold said quietly. "But she needs real rest. And food." Abigail sat beside Thomas, eating the last of the apples. "This isn't going to be over, is it?" "No," Thomas said. "Not until he's gone." They slept in shifts. The desert heat made the shelter unbearable during the afternoon, but they endured it. That night, just after dusk, they packed up again. They were halfway to Red Bluff when the first shot rang out. Marigold jerked the reins hard, pulling her horse behind a boulder. "Down!" she yelled, voice sharp as gunfire. Thomas grabbed Ruthie and Dove. Levi was already prone, scanning the horizon. A second shot splintered a tree trunk behind them. Jedediah's voice echoed from the ridge. "You think you can steal from me? Think you can run?" Marigold crouched behind a rock, eyes calm, rifle at the ready. "Keep the kids behind me," she whispered. "Can you hit him?" Thomas asked. "I don't miss." She waited, just long enough for the third shot to ring out, then rose in one fluid motion and fired. The crack of her rifle split the night. Then silence. For a long moment nothing moved. Then came a sound none of them expected. Jedediah's voice, pained but defiant. "You'll have to do better than that, woman." "Next one won't miss your shoulder," Marigold called back. Jedediah didn't reply. They waited. Minutes passed. No movement. No sound. Finally Thomas crept forward, eyes narrowed. The ridge was empty. "He's gone," he whispered. "He's waiting," Marigold corrected. "But he's wounded. And running low." Thomas looked back at the others. Ruthie was crying softly in Abigail's arms. Levi was silent, trembling just slightly. Marigold lowered her rifle. "We move. Now." They pushed forward, riding through the night. Red Bluff was another 3 hours away, and the darkness clung to them like smoke. But the air shifted, like maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas allowed himself to hope. Red Bluff didn't look like salvation. It was dry and crooked, leaning buildings huddled together like cattle in a storm. The dirt roads were hard-packed and mean, lined with wagons and old men chewing tobacco, their eyes always watching. It smelled of sweat and sun-baked leather, of horses and gun oil. But to Thomas and his siblings, it was the first town they'd seen in years that didn't belong to their father's shadow. Marigold led the way down the main road without hesitation, her coat flapping behind her, her presence cutting a clear path even among strangers. No one questioned her. They only stepped aside. Thomas rode close behind her, Ruthie half asleep in his arms, her head pressed against his chest. Abigail followed, her jaw clenched, eyes darting from window to doorway. Levi brought up the rear, tense, his hands never far from the knife on his belt. They stopped outside a small chapel at the far edge of town, the cross above the door crooked, half the roof covered in canvas. Light spilled from a single stained glass window, casting shards of color onto the dusty ground. Marigold dismounted and knocked twice on the door. A man answered. Middle-aged, lean, with sleeves rolled to the elbow and a wary look in his eye. "We're not open for confessions," he said flatly. Marigold raised an eyebrow. "I'm not here for your soul, Reverend. I'm here because you owe me." The man's face didn't change, but something in his posture did. "Well," he said after a moment, "I didn't expect you to collect on that debt. I never forget what's owed. Can we come in?" The Reverend stepped aside without another word. Inside, the church smelled of wood polish and dust. The pews were mismatched, some clearly salvaged from other buildings. A pot of coffee simmered on a stove in the corner. Marigold motioned for the kids to sit while she spoke low with the Reverend in the back. Thomas set Ruthie down on a bench and tucked his coat around her small frame. She slept without stirring. Abigail looked around with unease, her fingers gripping the hem of her skirt. Levi stayed standing, arms crossed. "He's not gonna just disappear, is he?" he asked. "No," Thomas said. "He won't." They were quiet after that. They all knew Jedediah. If he was still breathing, he would come. Wounded or not. After a few minutes, Marigold returned. "We've got a place for the night. The preacher's got a cellar out back. It's dry and hidden. It'll do until we figure the rest." She didn't smile, but her voice held a thread of reassurance. They followed her behind the chapel, where a heavy wooden door led down into cool, packed earth. The cellar was small but clean. Blankets were laid out, a lantern flickered on a barrel, and there was even a jug of water and some bread wrapped in cloth. Abigail sank to the floor with a sigh, her strength spent. Levi sat near the entrance, eyes on the steps. Thomas laid Ruthie down gently and tucked a blanket over her. She didn't wake. Marigold stayed by the door, listening, watching. "I don't know how to thank you," Thomas said quietly. "I don't need thanks," Marigold replied. "I need you to survive." He sat beside her. "Why do you care?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the dark outside the open cellar door. Then softly she said, "Because when I was 17 I ran too. My father was a monster. And no one stopped him. Not until it was too late. Someone found me after, took me in, gave me a name, taught me how to shoot. But I never forgot the girls I left behind. Or the silence that let him keep hurting." Thomas nodded, his throat tight. "Do you ever stop hearing it?" he asked. "The silence?" She shook her head. "No. But you learn to speak louder than it. That's what you're doing now." He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Levi. The silence felt too loud again, heavy with expectation. Dawn broke pale and cold, the light slipping through cracks in the boards above them. Marigold emerged first, scanning the area. "He's not in town yet. We've got time." She took them to the general store under cover of morning, where a woman behind the counter recognized her instantly. No questions were asked. The kids each got clean clothes, real food, and boots that fit. Ruthie's eyes lit up when she was handed a small toy horse carved from oak. Thomas watched it all unfold like a dream. For a moment they weren't fugitives. They were just kids in town. But peace never lasts. By noon, a rider galloped into Red Bluff, his horse frothing, eyes wide with fear. He stumbled into the saloon shouting about a madman on the ridge. Said he'd seen a man half covered in blood, riding hard and demanding names. Marigold heard the news from the preacher and returned to the cellar with her jaw set tight. "He's close." Thomas stood. "We run again?" She shook her head. "We end it." Levi looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean we stop looking over our shoulders. You're not prey anymore." That afternoon they moved to an abandoned stage stop just outside town. A place with one entry, two exits, and a clear line of sight. Marigold knew how to set a trap. She handed each of them a task. Abigail fetched water. Levi gathered firewood and helped board up loose windows. Thomas reinforced the back door and checked the rifles. As dusk painted the sky in blood and rust, they waited. Ruthie slept on a cot in the back, unaware of what was coming. Abigail stayed by her side, a knife under her pillow. Marigold and Thomas crouched by the front window, eyes on the road. He came just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jedediah rode into view like a demon summoned by the land itself. His arm was in a sling, but he sat tall in the saddle, shotgun in hand, face twisted with fury. Behind him, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and old fire. He didn't call out this time. He just rode up to the door and dismounted. Marigold stepped out first. He raised the shotgun. She didn't blink. "Put it down," she said. "You're out of time." "These are my kids," Jedediah growled. "You think you can take what's mine?" "They were never yours," Marigold said. "You don't own people." He fired. The shot grazed her shoulder. She staggered but didn't fall. Thomas appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Jedediah turned toward his son, sneering. "You gonna shoot your own blood?" Thomas didn't flinch. "You stopped being blood the first time you hit Ruthie." Jedediah took a step forward, and that was all it took. Marigold fired from her hip, one shot, clean and final. Jedediah collapsed without a sound, the dirt beneath him blooming red. Silence followed, long and echoing. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Ruthie's soft voice broke the stillness. "Is he gone?" Abigail nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's gone, baby." Levi let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. Thomas lowered the rifle and looked at Marigold. Her shoulder bled, but she stood straight. It was over. But more than that, it had begun. The sun rose over Red Bluff with a strange calmness, as if the land itself had exhaled. The earth, which had known so much silence, so much cruelty, now carried something different, a fragile breath of peace. The children of Jedediah Stone stood at the edge of that stillness, each of them changed, not simply by the journey or the blood spilled, but by the choice they'd made to become something more than victims of their past. Jedediah's body was buried behind the chapel at dawn. Not out of respect, there was none left for him, but because Ruthie had asked quietly, her voice thin but certain. "I don't want the coyotes to get him," she said. "He was mean, but he was still ours once." So they gave him a hole in the dry earth and a headstone carved from firewood, no name etched, no word said. Just the weight of finality pressing the dirt flat. Marigold stood nearby, arm in a sling, her face unreadable. She didn't speak. Not during the burial. Not afterward. She simply watched the way Thomas's hands moved as he covered the last mound of earth, the way Levi held Ruthie's hand and didn't let go. Later, as the kids rested in the shade of the chapel porch, Thomas found her by the well, drawing water with slow, deliberate turns. "You still planning on leaving?" he asked. Marigold looked at him, her eyes narrowed under the brim of her hat. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you think you're still running." He didn't answer. Not right away. His hands were calloused now, not just from chores but from fighting, surviving. His voice, when it came, was lower. "Older." "No," he said finally. "I'm not running anymore." She nodded once and handed him the full bucket. Red Bluff wasn't much, but it was enough. Over the weeks that followed, the children settled like wind-blown seeds. The preacher found them a room above the old telegraph office. 4 walls, a stove, and a roof that only leaked during real storms. Abigail cleaned houses for coin. Levi worked for the blacksmith, learning to shape iron with his own 2 hands. Ruthie helped at the schoolhouse, where she learned to read words out loud and smile again. And Thomas? He did everything. Hauled freight. Repaired fences. Cleared brush. He took jobs the town didn't even ask for. But every day ended the same, with him riding out to the ridge where the desert met the mountains, sitting atop a horse Marigold had given him. She called the horse Justice. He didn't ask why. She didn't leave. Not entirely. Marigold had found a room behind the saloon, quiet and cheap. She drank strong coffee in the mornings, played poker at night, and taught Levi how to load a rifle without looking. She never stayed long in one place, but she always came back. The town learned to respect her, and they learned fast. When 2 drunken ranchers started shouting slurs in front of Ruthie one afternoon, Marigold broke one of their noses and shot a bullet clean through the other's hat without grazing his scalp. Sheriff didn't ask questions. He just muttered, "Next time warn me," and went back inside. But beneath all that grit, all that survival, something tender grew. It was Abigail who noticed it first, the way Thomas looked at Marigold when she wasn't watching. The way she let her voice soften around him, just slightly. It was like watching 2 wounded animals learning not to flinch when touched. "You like her," Abigail said one evening, grinning over a pot of beans. Thomas didn't deny it. "She saved us." "She's not the saving type," Abigail said. "She chose us." That stuck with him. Weeks turned to months. And though peace settled over them, it never sank deep. They'd seen too much for that. Every knock at the door made Ruthie pause. Every gunshot in town made Levi's shoulders tense. Even Thomas, whose body had grown lean and strong with labor, kept his rifle oiled and close. Then one night a letter arrived. It came by rail from the north, sealed in plain paper. Thomas opened it while the others slept. The handwriting was tight, masculine, and unfamiliar. Heard about your father. Some say he got what he earned. Others say your name ain't yours anymore. I'm coming to see which is true. It wasn't signed. Thomas read it twice, then a third time. His breath tightened. The past never really died. Just waited. Sometimes in the faces of men who looked like law or vengeance or worse, kin. He didn't wake the others. But he went to find Marigold. She read the letter in silence, her eyes tracing every word slowly. Then she folded it in half and tossed it into the fire behind the saloon. Could be a bounty, she said. Or a cousin, Thomas said. Jedediah had brothers. Then he's coming to the wrong place. I don't want another fight. Then end it before it begins. So Thomas made a plan. He didn't run. He fortified. The preacher lent him a rifle. The blacksmith offered his hammer. Even the saloon owner, who never liked children, gave them a crate of old shotgun shells and a bottle of something strong for nerves. When the train pulled into Red Bluff 3 days later, the town held its breath. A man stepped off, tall, broad-shouldered, gray coat flapping. He walked like he belonged in every room he entered. His hat was tilted low, his face mostly shadow. Thomas stood in the center of the street, arms crossed, flanked by Marigold and Levi. Abigail watched from the telegraph office window, Ruthie beside her. The man stopped 10 feet from Thomas. You Stone's boy? I'm Thomas, he said. Not his boy anymore. The man nodded like he expected that answer. Heard he died hard. He died fast, Marigold corrected, stepping forward. The hard part was what he did before. The man looked her over once, then turned back to Thomas. I ain't here to avenge him. I just needed to see if the rumors were true. What rumors? Thomas asked. That a child grew into something bigger than fear. Thomas didn't reply. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their boots. The man tipped his hat. Looks like it's true. He turned and walked back to the train. No threats. No gun. Just that lingering doubt that maybe, just maybe, not every shadow came to kill. That night, Thomas stood on the ridge again, watching the moon light up the valley below. Marigold joined him, leaning against a post, her arm finally healed. You ever think we'd make it this far? He asked. No, she said. But you did. I'm not the same boy. No, she said. You're better. He looked over at her. You ever stop moving? Marigold smiled, slow and rare. Maybe. If there's a reason. He nodded, the silence between them no longer heavy. Just quiet. Peaceful. Behind them Red Bluff slept. The preacher's chapel glowed faintly. Levi and Ruthie shared a book by lantern light. Abigail hummed while mending a shirt. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. And for the first time in a long time that was enough.